Follow me and let the dead bury their dead. Whew, that hurts. And it seems kind of a contradiction to one of the things that we know, especially as Catholics, don't we? One of the corporal works of mercy is to bury the dead, isn't it? How could Jesus deny this man the right to bury his own father? How do we make sense of it? Well, I think we have to understand it in its proper context. Right before, this other man comes to him and says, Lord, I'll follow you wherever you will go. And Jesus basically says, you don't know where we're going. Birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head. Otherwise saying, do you know what you're getting into? We're on the move. Future is uncertain to you. What matters is that you follow me and go wherever I go, wherever the Spirit drives us. That is what you're getting into. We have this other man who comes up to him and says, Lord, I want to follow you, but first I have to do this other thing. I have to bury my father. Now, many scholars have debated over what this means, and there are a few different arguments, but the two that makes the most sense to me is, first, his father hasn't died yet. Lord, I want to follow you, but I have responsibilities at home. I'm waiting to where I have some free time, where my responsibilities are no longer holding me back. Others say that this young man is waiting for his inheritance. Once my dad dies, I'll have the money to be able to follow you. Another argument is that at the time, people would bury their dead and then they would stay in the place for at least 1 year in case the ground shifted and they had to rebury them. But you could see in all of these scenarios, what's happening here is that there is something holding him back. Some other obligation that is not allowing him to be free in the moment to follow the Lord. But Jesus is there, right in front of him. That's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, isn't it? Wouldn't any of us put aside all of our plans and the things that we were expecting to do if the Lord came and stood before us today and said, follow me? What are the things that we would say, no, Lord, I got to finish this other thing first? We might say that we'd like to just put it all away and come running at the drop of a hat, right? But would we? The Lord is inviting us to consider what are those things that we are holding on to that maybe take precedent in our lives. The Lord wants us fully, not just partially. He wants the whole thing. Now today, I'd like to do something a little bit different. You know, over the last couple of weeks, I've shared with you about how do we know who to trust within the church? And I've laid out some different things to look for, right? And tradition is a big part of it, and looking at who came before us. And I thought, since today is the feast of Saint Irenaeus, I'd go to the source and see what Saint Irenaeus had to say. Here's a man who's just a couple of generations right after the apostles, in the 100s. Early days of the church. Church is still a persecuted church in hiding. And what did he have to say about that? This is St. Irenaeus writing. If there should be a dispute over some kind of question, ought we not have recourse to the most ancient churches in which the apostles were familiar, and draw from them what is clear and certain in regard to the question? What if the apostles had not in fact left us writings? Would it not be necessary to follow the order of tradition? which is handed down to those whom they entrusted to the churches. He goes on to list how each of the bishops was a successor, leading back to the apostles, leading back to Christ. So anytime you hear somebody say that church tradition or apostolic succession is an invention of the medieval world, just go back to Irenaeus. Very early days of the church, already saying it. Now there is another thing in here that I'd like to share with you, and I think it has to do with what we're hearing today with Jesus with this young man. You may have picked up for me, the most crucial virtue is humility. Surprise, surprise, a Franciscan believes that humility is the doorway to all graces. And what do I mean by that? Oftentimes when we think of humility, we think of it as somebody who doesn't boast, somebody who doesn't put on a big show. And of course, that is true, but for me, it's much deeper than that. It's a recognition and a remembrance. It's a disposition of our heart to remember that we are not God. It's a spirituality of creatureliness. That we are not the author of our own lives. We are not the originators of the world. We find ourselves here out of the love of God. And we must always remember that fact. Now, speaking to this is what Irenaeus had to say in the 100s. If you are obstinately hardened and reject his skillful hand, and show yourself ungrateful to him for having made you man, you will, by your becoming ungrateful to God, have lost both life and his skill. To create is proper to the kindness of God, but to be created is proper to the nature of man. If then you will render to him what you have, that is, faith in him and subjugation, you will be the recipient of his skill and will be a perfect work of God. If, however, you will not believe in him and will flee his hand, the cause of the imperfection will be in you that did not obey, but not in him who called you. In other words, if God is the author of all good things, if it is his hand that forms and shapes beauty, well then if we want to grow and we want to live, we must allow ourselves to be in his hands. Be willing to be shaped and molded like that clay in the hands of the potter. If we allow pride or our own ambitions, our own ideas of how things should be to reign in our hearts, but then is it any wonder when we grow hardened and do not grow? God is God and we are not. Today, the young man is standing before the Lord, the author of life, and he is saying, "Come and follow me. Be in my presence." You don't know where we're going. You don't know what the future holds, but you know the author of all good things. Trust in him. Be willing to put aside your own ideas and your own ambitions and plans. Put away those things that are holding you back. And be willing to be molded and shaped by me in whatever may come. This is what it means to be a creature. This is what it means to be humble before the Lord. And this is what I believe Jesus is getting at when he says, "Let the dead bury their dead. Let those who have put their trust in themselves and not in the one who brings forth life. Let them deal with their own world. But you, come, follow me." Sisters and brothers, if today you hear God's voice standing before you, calling you, "Follow me," and you feel something holding you back, ask the Lord for the grace and courage to be freed of it. And go, follow him.